People obsess, I think, a little bit about these specific beats you have to hit in the middle. You don't. You absolutely don't. You set it up properly. That does all the heavy lifting of supporting all of Act Two.
So, one of the really interesting things about your book is that you don't spend a lot of time talking about what I think a lot of people struggle with, which is a second act. You know what I mean?
I do.
And so, tell me why you don't need to spend time on that. Why is that
Yeah.
so clear to
And
you?
yeah, this is something I feel pretty strongly about, right? And one of the things that makes my method very different than other books that deal with structure. Other books that deal with structure typically are going to present a linear point of view. They're going to tell you you have to hit 15 or 22 or however many pre-prescribed story beats, right?
I think
Um,
you got Save the Cat and Truby in those 2 right there,
yeah,
15.
and I've also seen 120. I've seen all sorts of numbers, right? I'm not naming names,
Uh,
but most deal with specific beats. That's not what I do. That what I strongly believe is that if we set up these things in Act One and Act Three properly, and that's not easy, by the way, right? But if we follow all these, we find a want that they get, and that is they ironically feel the opposite about in 75%, etc. If we set it up properly, that does all the heavy lifting of supporting all of Act Two, even though Act Two is twice as long an act than Act One or Act Three is on their own, right? So um, people obsess, I think, a little bit about these specific beats you have to hit in the middle. You don't. You absolutely don't. Some people use my method with other beat sheet methods, and I'm fine with that. If it can work hand in hand with Save the Cat and Truby and these other methods. They don't contradict each other. The problem, though, with strictly linear methods is that you can, if you can follow them and still end up not telling a story, because what they don't do is explain the connection between the parts. And mine's all about the parts. I only have that many. I mean, I don't have that many linear beats in it. I mean, we have yeah, your screenplay is going to have a first scene and it's going to have a last scene. And then there's something that happens at 25% and there's something that happens at 75%, right? Those are the only, kind of landmarks that I think you need to hit. Um, structure wise, linear structure wise. The rest of my beats are about or not beats, excuse me. The rest of my elements are about, in the nutshell, about the connection, what connects those four moments. They are not four random moments.
mhm.
They are connected, right? There's a relationship to what happens at 25% with the want and what happens at 75%, right? There's a relationship with what happens at 75% and in the very last scene of the movie with the flaw, which is not a moment in time at all, right? So I strongly believe that if you set up these things properly in Act One and Act Two, and then one other caveat is that you continue to maintain conflict. Right, you have to continue to throw obstacles at your protagonist. You don't need those pre-prescribed beats. If you like to use, and I tell my students, if you like to use them, use them. That's great. I had someone come up to me at Austin Film Festival actually and ask if I could sign his book, and I was very flattered to do so. And he said, "Can I really throw out my copy of Save the Cat?" And I said, "Do you like Save the Cat? Because if you like Save the Cat, you can use my book and Save the Cat. There's no reason you can't." And he
Mhm.
said, "No, I hate Save the Cat." And I said, "Well, then you can throw it out. If you respond to this better, throw it out. There's absolutely no reason you have to follow those, right?
Right.
As long, again, I gotta say that caveat again, you have to set things up properly and do the whole nutshell. In other words, set up things properly in Act One and Act Three, and find the flaw and strength that glues them all together. You don't have to predetermine those beats. You won't run, everyone runs into out of steam, right?
Yeah.
In Act Two, it's probably because they didn't set things up right. Someone, I'm going to forget the famous person who said, the problem in your third act is in your first act.
Mhm.
Someone famous said that. I can't remember who, right? But and that's exactly what I'm talking about. Those, if you're having problems, and also if you're sputtering out in act two, the problem is you don't know your ending probably.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I can't tell you how often I will go watch a movie and at the beginning it's about this father and this daughter, and then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happens that has nothing to do with it. And at the end they hug and they've solved their problems because the father has saved the daughter. And I'm like, those are not connected in any way, shape, or form. It's not emotionally satisfying. It's entertaining because you get to see explosions and stunts and things like that. But again, I can't harp about how important it is that all of these beats are connected.